Hi everybody and welcome back to my channel. My name is Joni Young if you're new here, and today I'm going to be showing you step by step how to paint on an oval canvas. We're painting a cozy cabin in the woods. Stay tuned and enjoy this tutorial. Okay, so let's begin with this painting. I'm working on an oval canvas today using the following colors. I've got my neon pink, orange, and yellow warm. And I've also got some prism purple violet and some light ultramarine blue or light blue violet. You can use white as well to blend the colors and make softer tones. Any white, I'm using titanium white in particular, and I've got a number 50 filbert brush here to cover the background with. You can use any large brush that you have, and you can also use any other variations of these colors. If you're not sure what alternatives to use, just leave a comment and a question below and I'll be happy to answer. I'm taking all three colors without blending them on the palette, and I'm going to go directly onto the canvas with just a little bit of water in my brush, and I'm going to let those colors blend out naturally across the canvas as I pull my brush around. So side to side, concentrating on the center of the canvas first where I apply most of the paint, and then I'm going to softly work that paint out of my brush off to the left and the right by picking up a little bit of white. So again, just adding some of that white without washing my brush off on the top, the sides, and then I'll gradually, very gently blend over the center and sweep my brush up just a little bit on an angle to create a little bit of movement and interest in the sky. Then we're going to be washing our brush out completely, drying it off, and getting ready to come in with our purple and our blue. Okay, so after I wash my brush out, I'm going to go and tap into my blue and my purple, tapping without blending, and I'm going to start applying the horizon line. So just below halfway across the canvas, pull from the right, pull from the left, and then leaving a little space in the middle. I'm going to start pulling a little bit more below the horizon line on either side for some shadow and what's eventually going to be our foreground and land. And I really want it to look streaky so that we have those ripples in between where the water is and we've got light and shadow happening. I don't want it to look too solid at this point, so we've got a nice balance of complementary colors, the peach with that purpley blue color. The next place I'm going to be adding this color is up in the sky, and I'm going to be working on the clouds. So I'm going to take a little bit more, and I'm also going to add some white because I know it's going to dry a little bit darker, and I really want to have a powdery purpley blue color up here. And if yours dries a little bit too dark, you can always go back in and add a little bit of white after. That'll really help balance it out. So I'm going to make my clouds larger on the top and then make them smaller as they get down towards the horizon. That really helps to create a dramatic perspective in a painting. It also helps when you're working on a round and oval canvas. These are incredible canvases to create landscapes on, and you can find them if you check regularly at your art supply stores. They tend to go pretty quickly, and they're kind of expensive to get shipped and order online. So I actually got mine at Michael's and at the dollar store. There were literally 2 left on the shelf, and I haven't, to be honest, I haven't seen them in a really long time. So I was really excited when I found them, and I think these are the only tutorials I have on my channel, and I've got over like 400, I think, tutorials, and these are the only 2. Well, I've got another round canvas tutorial, and I'll leave a link for that below this video. Round and oval canvases that I've got on my channel as tutorials. So I hope you guys are enjoying seeing some different shapes that you can paint on. So just like I said, working on these clouds, larger on the top, smaller on the bottom, adding a little bit more blue, purple at times for some more depth and shadow, and more white where I want them to be a little softer and brighter looking. So I'm going to do the same thing down below here, and I'm going to start tapping in where I've got some grass and some land, building up this composition and landscape. So this is really, really fun to use a large filbert brush for this, but many of you don't have a brush like this. You can use a fan brush. You can also use a smaller filbert brush and any mop brush. So I'm going to tap on the other side here, and then I turn my brush over and pull and flick up to create that instant forest look, which I just did over on the right side. Super easy to do. It works best if you have a little bit of water in your brush to help pull and flick that paint out with. And I'm just going to create smaller taps as we get closer here to the foreground and the bottom of the canvas. That could be a few different things. It could be mounds of grass. It could also be little rocks with moss covered on them. As you can see here, I'm creating that instant little forest tree area again by turning my brush over. It's a really fun technique that you can use and apply to many of your landscape paintings. And then I'm going to pull softly across for the water. After washing that brush out, I'm going to pick up my oval mop brush here. This is a 1-inch, beautiful brush. Don't get it wet. You just want to go straight right into the paint. Otherwise, you're going to ruin the shape. And I'm just picking up a little bit of those colors again with more white this time. And I'm going to tap, tap, tap really, really softly to create a nice little highlight here and build up the bushes and foliage a little bit more. I'm going to do the same thing over on the other side. So I really do love these oval mop brushes, but if you can't find one, you can just use a regular round mop brush or a filbert brush. There's always alternatives that I have for you guys so that you can all paint along. And if you're not sure which alternatives and what choices to make, just ask me in the comments and question section below. I'm now going to pick up a little bit more of my purple with a bit of white in my brush there and start applying the treetops. And then I'm going to come in after with my tree trunk and branches. So I'll add a little bit on both sides. I want to keep them larger on the edge of the canvas, and then as we get in towards the center of the canvas, everything's going to be smaller. So keep that in mind so that you create the proper perspective in your paintings. So larger in the foreground and smaller for the distance. I'm going to set that brush in the water and switch over to a long liner brush. You can use any size liner brush that you have. And I'm going to pull up some tree trunks and some branches. I'm going to take my purple, I'm going to take a little bit of water and a little bit of my orange yellow mixture. That with the purple will make brown. So really thin, you can see here it's quite thin, and that's the best combination. More water, or ratio I should say, more water than paint when adding your branches, especially with a liner brush. They can be tricky to use, but that's a good tip for you, okay? The more water you have on your brush, the easier that paint will flow. And I'm gonna make them smaller and smaller as we get towards the center of the canvas there. And then add just a little bit of a reflection in the water. So not a lot of detail. These are far away, and I want to keep the depth for the main tree that we're going to have, which I think is the focal point in this painting, and the fence off to the right. So just a watered down brown color, again, that I made with my orange and my purple and water. I'll add a few little trees on this side as well. And once I'm finished my branches and my tree trunks, I'm going to go right back over to another oval mop brush. I've got a few different ones on hand because it needs to be dry, right? Otherwise the shape won't be right. So I'm going to tap into that white and that blue, and I'm going to add some more foliage and branches over top of the brown that I applied earlier, just to make them look a little bit more realistic. You want to paint your trees in layers. So we'll just add a little bit more there. I've added more white this time with my blue, whereas the first layer was a little bit more purple with white. And I'll just add a little bit more highlights here to my foliage in the foreground. And now I've got a smaller liner brush that I'm going to be using. It's shorter, so I've got more control with this when painting a fence. And I'm going to take my purple with a little bit of water. I'm going to try to use a little bit more paint this time so that it looks more pronounced and more in the foreground. So softer tones for the background and distance. And I'm just going to add a few lines here, taller, thicker here in the foreground. Then they're going to get a little bit shorter and closer together and kind of just disappear there off into the distance. I'll add a little bit of a shadow off to the right side by watering down my brush slightly. So I'm just going to pull at the base of each post and pull a skinny line, just go all the way through. It can be crooked, that'll add even more character to your fences and your paintings. And then, like I said, just at the base of each post, I'm just going to pull off on a little bit of an angle with a bit of watered down paint on my brush. I'm going to come in with some white and add a highlight on the left side of each of the posts. So we've got our shadow on the right side, highlight on the left. I'm going to take a little bit of my neon yellow warm and tint my white with it, so we're getting that warm highlight on the left side. For my large tree in the foreground, I'm going to be using a number 2 round brush. I'm going to take my neon orange with my prism purple violet, a little bit of that blue, and not a lot of water. So I really want this to be nice and dark and be in full contrast here in the foreground and really stand out. So I'm going to start just off the bottom left side, pull and twist and be quite wiggly with how I'm taking this tree trunk. I want it to have a lot of character to it, and that's a great way to do it, is just let yourself be a little bit shaky. And remember to make it thicker at the base of the tree, of course, and then eventually gradually get thinner and thinner as you get towards the top of the tree. I'll then add branches off of both sides and the top as well of the tree, and add a few towards the bottom, just a little bit, and then I'll switch over to a liner brush if I want to make smaller, finer detailed branches. So you can get away with using the little round brush here as a tiny liner brush if you just don't press very hard, barely touch the canvas, and use just the tip of your brush. It'll help to add a little bit of water as well. And again, that's just for those smaller, finer detailed branches towards the end of the larger branches. But I'll show you how to use a smaller liner brush to do this. So I'm just going to take a little bit of water along with those colors, a little bit more blue. I'm going to make them a little bit lighter. That'll also help to make them look finer and more detailed. And whenever I feel like it's harder to pull that out, I'm going to resist pushing with my brush. That's a natural thing that we want to do when we're painting branches, but really resist that. Go back and reload your brush. You're going to need a lot of patience when using a liner brush, so it's normal to paint a branch and then have to go right back over to your palette and water and reload. If you want each one to be nice and free-flowing, that's what you're going to have to do. Otherwise, you're going to end up pushing too hard and they're not going to look as delicate. I always like to have a little funky branch right kind of almost down at the bottom of the tree trunk. I think it looks pretty cool and adds a lot in the foreground. It sets everything back in the distance too when we have these big branches and trees here in the foreground. So that's optional. You can paint any kind of tree that you want. But that's kind of how I like to lean towards in my paintings. I like trees with a lot of character. But I'm back over to my oval mop brush, which is wet, and you can see the shape of it is a little bit different. It's not as poofy, but that's okay for the types of leaves that I want to paint on my branches here. I want them a little bit tighter and closer together compared to the poofier shaped ones that we did earlier. So I'm taking, for the base of these, my purple and a little bit of blue. I want it to be a bit darker here to start and really stand out from everything else in the painting. So this is really the focal point, drawing our eye in, and that little cabin off to the right helps to create the atmosphere in this painting as well, but it's all about this tree. So after I tap for my foliage, I gently pull and flick off some of that paint to create that weeping willow or hanging moss look. I'm now going to take my round brush again and come in and add some more branches and just redefine a few of the ones that I painted earlier just to make them stand out a little bit more. So again, just with my purple, more purple than blue, I'm going to go over the tree trunk as well towards the right side, and then I'm going to come in and add a few rocks in the foreground. And for my rocks, I just usually do half circles or half ovals that are a little bit misshapen. That's the easiest way to approach them. When you paint shapes instead of thinking about what you're actually working on, it can make it a lot easier and simplify it. So just crooked half circles, all different sizes, leave some spaces between, and add a little pull and flick side to side underneath to make it look like there's water there. Okay, once we have the base for our rocks, I'm going to come in and add more depth by building up the purple, and then I'm going to add a little bit of blue for a soft highlight, just so that it stands out a little bit more, and it's another way for me to add this beautiful color and incorporate it in this landscape. So I'll add a few more little dots and dabs here for some smaller stones in the water, and then we'll get working on our next step. So for our next step, I'm using a number 4 flat brush, and I'm just going to create a few little lines, brush strokes side to side, tight and close together, just to create a little bit of a pathway here along the edge of the water. It's time to start painting our cozy little cabin, and I'm going to make the color that's very similar to burnt sienna by mixing my orange, yellow, and my purple. So I'm not going to use a lot of water for this because I don't want it to be see-through or transparent. So I'm just going to start by painting a rectangle, and this is just the first base, and then I'm going to add a little bit of white to add the highlight on the side of the house. I'll add more yellow warm with white for the roof where the sun's going to be hitting it. So I'm going to pull and drag on a slant diagonally to create that suggestion of a roof, and then lightly pull and drag for a highlight on the side of the house. Back over to my dark color, my purple and orange for a dark brown color, and then I'm going to go inside front of the house here. That's going to be in shadow on the right side, and then add a shadow right underneath the roof line. Back over with a clean brush to my yellow and white, and I'm going to redefine my highlights. I'll add a few windows and a door. And I want it to look like there's somebody inside the house and that the lights are on. I always do that with my cottages or cabins. So I'll add a few little dots and dabs just to indicate a few little windows. Super easy. And you can use a liner brush if you feel more comfortable, but if you just use the corner of your flat brush, you can easily do that. And back over to my blue and purple with a little bit of white. I'm going to add just a little line here for my chimney. I'll add some smoke coming out of it in just a little bit. I'm just going to tidy up these lines. And then switch over to my little round brush that I've got here. It's a number 2, and I'm just going to dab a tiny bit of white on the end of my brush with a little bit of that blue to make the perfect shade of smoke coming out. So I tightly wiggle and work the paint out of my brush as I get higher up in the sky with it, and then just add a little bit more. So the most paint is going to be right at the top of your chimney, and then it's just going to gradually disappear as the paint runs out of your brush up higher in the sky. I'm going to add just a little line here for the shadow of the chimney on an angle. So I want to add a little bit more warmth to the front of the house here, so I'm going to go into a little bit of my pink and my neon orange with just a little bit of that neon yellow and white. And I'm going to go over the front of the house. I know I can easily go back in and add those windows again, and I'm going to add some more some windows to the other side of the house. So as that's drying there, I'm just going to quickly go over to my dark color again, and just add in a little bit more lines and definition, and then add a few dabs for the beginning of our windows. So I want to have some shadow there first in order for my highlights to really stand out. With a clean brush, I'm going to go right back over to my light yellow and white and a little bit of orange. Any of those warm colors with white will really work for the light in our windows. So I'm just going to steady my hand by placing my finger on the canvas. I know it's dry underneath and I can do that carefully. And add the dots and dabs for my windows. I'm going to add a little bit more pink and orange to the foreground here and a little bit in the water. And then I'm going to add a few more highlights on the tree trunk to make it stand out just a little bit more. Add a few more branches. So just working on the final details to finish off this painting. So here with a flat brush, a little bit of white, orange, and yellow. I'll very lightly, barely touching that canvas, graze over, and this is going to do two things: add a highlight and some texture to that tree trunk. And finally, for the finishing touch to this painting, one more coat of purple should do it for the left side of this tree and a few of the branches. This is just going to give it that finishing touch and really make it stand out, building up all that contrast. This painting was so much fun. I can't wait to hear what you guys think and see your versions. I look forward to painting with you all again. Have a wonderful day. Bye, everybody.